I slipped the boat, we changed the impellers and the motors, and the little outboards, you can actually pull them out in about 3/4 of an hour, and they're quite easy to get in and out. You just take them into the agent to be serviced. After leaving Lake's entrance, we then continued along Bass Strait. Unfortunately, I hadn't checked all the shackles securely. They weren't secure enough, and one came undone, so a little bit of a reattaching of the shackle in Bass Strait. And then we had a pleasant meal, and this is just pouring soup in Bass Strait. It's a little bit different to serving soup in a monohull in Bass Strait. I then continued on that coast, and it was actually this time 2 years ago when all that inclement weather was on the eastern Australian coast, and Pasha Bulka was aground at Newcastle. I had to stay 4 days in Eden and 6 days in Ulladulla. This is in Ulladulla, where we tied to the Storm Buoys in amongst the trawlers, and the trawlers were the trawler skippers were very hospitable, and they moved their boats to accommodate us, so that I was well truly tucked in. We had 45 knots of wind for a couple of came through, but it was well protected. Leaving there into Sydney Harbour. As I came round and through the heads on a Sunday morning, I was greeted with hundreds of boats coming down the harbour with spinnakers, and we just moved to one side, and then continued off and anchored in Lavender Bay, and I was there for a few days, and then I collected the last of my 82 charts. I had the electronic charts, and I also had 82 paper charts, because I just felt that I needed them. Everyone enjoyed looking at them. We knew exactly where we were if we had a failure from the electronic chart. But the electronic chart was superb. I then continued on past Trial Bay up through into Coffs Harbour, and I understand Coffs Harbour's had a fair bit of damage in its last few days. But this is actually a sea wind. This is a picture of an early trip, the early trip going past Cape Byron. We're going south, but the sea wind's going north, so it's passing the most eastern part of the mainland, Cape Byron. Into through the seaway and then through the boardwalk. Now Paula joined me she flew to Brisbane and joined me here, and she was going to spend some time with Sundays, but she ended up with a one-way ticket to Perth. And we were confronted on the Sunday afternoon as we went up the Broadwater with all these huge boats coming back on the Sunday afternoon about 4 o'clock back to Surfers Paradise. So it was quite interesting to see how fast they all moved. We then went up anchored in the the Brisbane River opposite Breakfast Creek, and the swift flowing river, there was a boat came down and tangled into a boat next to us, and then one of these other little boats, it broke its mooring and it went over towards the bank, so I was able to re-anchor that. And as we're driving around Brisbane, I received a phone call from the water police. They say, "Oh, you own Amazing Grace?" Yes. Oh, it's drifting down the river, so we've let out a bit more chain, and it's secure, so we thank them very much, and much appreciative of that. Of course, we went right up into the Brisbane itself, and then on to my family are all buried in a little cemetery in Archerfield Aerodrome. They once owned the Aerodrome Cooper's Plains, and there's an aerodrome around the cemetery, and in a line there is my great-great-grandparents, my great-grandparents, my grandmother, my grandfather's ashes, and my father's ashes, all in the one line. And it turns out this year is the 150th anniversary of Brisbane, and that's when that was started. That cemetery was started 150 years ago, and it's a part of the celebrations for 150 years of Brisbane late in October. Well, then we replenished the stores, and we then set out down the river, and there was this large container boat going out, and we moved to one side, and as the big boat went past, the pilot came out and acknowledged us and said thanks very much, and I take from that they have a lot of trouble with boats in the Brisbane River not getting out of the way of those big boats. We then across Moreton Bay, and then left Moreton Bay. We bought some lamb shanks. There's this nice little butcher in near Breakfast Creek, and Paula was cooking them, and that was her introduction really to the ocean, going out up Moreton Bay into the South Pacific Ocean at night, heading up to the Wide Bay Bar. So she actually produced a magnificent meal, but she didn't feel like eating the lamb shanks. But they tasted. And then as we went on, we then went through across the Wide Bay Bar and up through the Great Sandy Straits, where a friend of Paula's, Paul, he left. And so as we're sailing between Lady Elliot Island and Lady Musgrave, we decided we'd get married. So I proposed to her on Lady Musgrave Island, and I thought that was appropriate. So then we decided we'd get married, and so off we go as an engaged couple. We then continued on through the Narrows, up through and go through Gladstone, and as you go through the Narrows, you've got to then cross at the cattle crossing, which a lot of you are probably familiar with, and just got to time it at the Rotter. Yes, I got there 10 minutes early and just touched the bottom at 10 minutes, and we just waited, just coming on dark. And in the morning, a magnificent, fog had come in, and a really interesting area to go cruising through. And then on to Great Keppel Island, and of course, Island hopped up towards Mackay at Hexham Island. We left Palm Island and set the spinnaker, and giving Paula some lessons on the spinnaker, and we just went from 8:30 in the morning to 3:30 in the afternoon to Mackay on the spinnaker, and just pressing the buttons on the autopilot to correct for a couple of degrees. And on to Brampton Island, where that's where we saw most whales, in that area around Brampton Island. As we then continued north, we had a minor problem in as much as the grub screws came out of the furler and required to be retensioned with a little Allen key. So hauled up in the bosun's chair, and the aspect of that is that you've got to hang on, because I did it once before and the wind blew me from one side to the other around the forestay and swung me back, so I really hung on there. But it's some of those little things you've got to do. We then went through the Hinchinbrook Channel. As Paul and I were on our own now, we're going through the Hinchinbrook Channel, a magnificent area for cruising. And then on to Cairns, where we picked up the rest of the crew who went with us to Cairns. It was John Clayton and his wife Anne, and Bill and Robin Crisfield had sailed with me previously. After leaving Cairns, we then followed Island hopped along the way, and of course you've always got to scrub the deck, and the first mate scrubs the deck. Oh, I do too as well, so... Yeah, yes, we all share. Then into Cooktown, and this is where Captain Cook careened his boat on the Endeavour River, and he was very fortunate to be able to come into to such a location. And then on out to Lizard Island, and anchored in Watson's Bay, magnificent anchorage, and as you look from the lookout, you can see into Cook's Passage, and you see where Cook went out. And Cook actually went out into the Pacific Ocean. He'd had enough of the reef, but then he nearly got washed up on the reef, and he wanted more protection, so he came back in. And I've got to take my hat off to those navigators, particularly Flinders and someone called a captain called Philip Parker King. And there is a book you can get, King of the Coast, and it's an interesting read of his journey around Australia. And he did it in 1822, and Flinders did it in 2001, 2003. We then continued on north, and with my $24 fishing line, I was able to catch quite a few fish, but made a mess of the boat. And I cleaned it, okay. Then on to further north as we were going, it was Australian Rules Grand Final Day, and we had a little St. John radio, and we picked up the broadcast out of Indonesia by a wire hooked onto the rigging, and we were able to listen to the Australian Rules Grand Final, which kept the crew happy.